Another area that often missionaries misunderstand in this area is patron-client orientations. It's an area that's been observed by anthropologists for a long time, and usually in the West it's viewed negatively, even though we have patron-client frames of reference here as well too. Well, what do we mean by this power game? And it's usually in large power distance setting you're more likely to see patron-client orientations. The systems are organized by people of power, both men and women, who build and keep a loyalty of people in more humble position than them. Both the patrons and the clients regard the link between them as a voluntary personal attachment, just like the bond of affection holding members of a family or a kin group together. But this is voluntary rather than required. Okay? Unlike families where the linkage is regarded as permanent and often taken for granted, a patron-client relationship must be renewed constantly. Because if you find a better patron, you're going to jump ship and go with somebody else. Someone else who can better look after your needs. When I first came here to Wheaton, I had a good friend who was a faculty member. I had seen him speak at a couple of conferences when I was in Africa. And he really helped me navigate Wheaton's political structure and helped me understand it. So we started having lunch together, then we said we were having power lunches together, then we said we were having power distance lunches together, then we said we were having power encounter lunches together. So we ran a complete spectrum. But over my first several years here on campus, he, not as much a patron as I'm using it here, but he really was a person I looked to for advice. He was a coach, he was a mentor. But when you think of patron-client game, you can think of coaching and mentoring, but gone about 3 steps beyond what you think of that. So let's look at the process of what it takes to become a client. Usually it's a series of discrete steps that are followed, unless you're born into this relationship and you're born with these client relationships. By the way, one of the ways we saw this come about in Kenya is whenever we had a problem with immigration, there was one person we would send to the immigration office to deal with it. She was a secretary, an administrative assistant, so she, in our own organization, she had very low power, but she had relatives in the immigration office who were connected to the president of the country. And so when the rest of us could not sort anything out, she was capable of going in there and talking with her relatives. She was part of a patron-client system that she was born into. It wasn't something that she came into as a result of achievement. It was something she was born into, and she could go talk to her relatives, and we could hear from her then, and occasionally we would hear, don't even try and get a visa with this person. For some reason, it's not going to work. She didn't always know why, but she had the in the organizational structure that none of the rest of us had, and especially those of us like me who were outsiders. So a potential client asks for an appointment or simply visits the patron to establish opportunity. The information for this comes from an article in EMQ written by a missionary who had worked in Africa all of his life, and he had been born and raised in Liberia, and then he was in Kenya when he wrote this article, and he talked about the patron-client game that was involved there. And so sometimes people would visit him in order to establish a relationship. The client might bring a small gift or offer a service. You need this, well, here, let me help you with this, to indicate an interest in a relationship. Now, if the patron is a missionary, oh, cool, they're giving me a gift for visiting their country. They're giving me a gift for being a newbie. And it's a very small gift, so it's not a large one. Or they might say, if you need help doing this, then I will, okay, I have an insider who can help me walk through the system. Getting a package out of the post office, for example. When I say small, it took about 3 hours to do that. You had to get roughly a dozen signatures. And there was no indicated signage of what window you go to next and where you go to next, and it had to clear customs, and inevitably you would get charged customs on it unless you knew the right rules to go through. I walked through this process. The water pump on our car was failing us, so my father-in-law, who knew cars, I asked him if he could find the right water pump for us. And so we had a Toyota Corolla, but it was made in Japan Toyota Corolla, so the drivers The steering wheel was on the other side of the car, because in Japan they drive on the other side of the road from what we drive in the US. So we weren't sure if it was the right part, but he air-shipped it to us, which cost $100. The part was $25. Air freighting was $100. It took me 8 hours to clear it out of customs. I got it without having to pay any extra duty on it. But then when I got it to the gas station for them to put it in, it unfortunately was not the correct part. It was just a reality of what we faced. But at the airport, somebody was willing to help me walk through the system, but at the end he asked for me to pay him. And I think now, to my embarrassment, I gave him a very small amount of money. He spent an entire day with me, helping me walk through the system, and I didn't pay him an appropriate amount. And I'm embarrassed about that right now. He wasn't looking as much for a patron client system. That was his job. He was going to be out there trying to find people like me who didn't know what they were doing and walking them from step to step to step. Now, if the patron accepts the gift, the anticipation in a patron client system is eventually you're going to give a bigger gift. You might offer a job to the person. You might give an item. In this case, the way the author mentioned this, they would bring him a small thing, perhaps a touristy type of item. And then they would come asking, can I borrow your hoe because I need to plant my garden? Oh, now can I borrow some seed? Then can I borrow some fertilizer? Then can I borrow some weed killer? So by the time it's all said and done, you've paid for the entire garden as this person. What you as an American, or I as an American, would be thinking this person is just mooching off me. As far as the person is concerned, they have become a client of mine. They might not use that language. They might not even have that language, but they owe me more than they can repay. And as far as they're concerned, that's a good relationship. One of the things you have to add into this mix is in a patron-client system, there is a mutual debt, but usually it's the debt the patron owes the client that's so big, the client owes the patron is so big the client can never repay it, and that's an issue then that you've bought their loyalty. They will work for you. They will ensure you have a good reputation. If you're going to run for election, they will run you through election. It's an interesting thing to think through that the city of Chicago has been under federal purview for about 20 years now because the patronage system, that's the language that's used in the city of Chicago for finding jobs. You'll find in one celebrated case, a 19-year-old cousin of a higher-up official was a water district, a leader for a water district, having no experience in running this, but he got the job through patronage. And this was a federal system that was brought on by the courts over Chicago because of a lawsuit that was brought, and there was a federal person who's been put in the position of watching the city, and the thinking was in 5 years his job will be done and the city will be straightened out. And it's been over 20 years now, and he's still in that position because Chicago still operates on very much a strong patronage system. So it's not just in majority world settings. It takes place here as well too. The client receives the patron's gift and the relationship is established, constantly shifting and being renegotiated. There's no written contract for this. And when I say renegotiated, it means the client is constantly in need of favors and the patron is constantly offering favors to the client, but the client also brings favors to the patron. The favors are, again, loyalty, spread of good reputation. This is an issue of face. It's an issue of honor as well, too. And when we talk about honor in the lecture, you'll hear a little bit more about that at that